I was ready at 9 o'clock.
Okay then, let's get going. Hello and welcome to DesignChat, the best live design discussion on the internet. My name is Ryan McGovern, your host on Twitter. I am at Hoopajuve and at DesignChat. This week we have brought back yet another conference speaker, Aaron Dignan of Undercurrent.com. Welcome, Aaron. Thank you for coming.
Hello, thanks for having me.
There's golf claps in the room that if the microphone was strong enough, they would hear, but maybe we'll edit those in later. So I have a feeling that tonight we're going to be talking a lot about brands. We're going to be talking a lot about social media and design and what's across. Those conversations are always fun, and no matter what happens, or what kind of guests we have on the show, somehow we always circle back to social media because that's kind of how the show started, and that's what we're doing right now. We're talking socially, so don't be surprised if we focus on that tonight. So, okay, for those of those people who are out there who are not familiar with Undercurrent.com and you're doing, why don't you?
Which is most everyone.
Could be, but I know you have fans out there somewhere. Tell us a little bit about Undercurrent.
Sure. So we have very little to do with design in the sort of more traditional or visual sense. And in fact, we're sort of founded as a strategy company. So we do consulting around basically how organizations spend their time and their money online. So a lot of, obviously, social media comes into play, but also just sort of putting a digital worldview on a lot of different problems. And that could be everything from how do you move people through the airport faster to how do you get people to pick up a can of Pepsi, or even an environment like this, how do we get more people to show up? How do we get them to feel engaged? So it's really, it's a company sort of focusing on incentivizing human behavior, using digital and what's out there in the ether to sort of, to accomplish those goals.
And mind control.
Definitely. Mind bullets are a big part of it.
And if you watch Fringe, you know what I'm talking about. Mind control is really big right now. It's hot trending topic.
The fringe plot is pretty straightforward, right? You create the problem, and then the old guy remembers that he had something to do with it, and then he solves it.
And then he touches something really gooey, really sticky. And he looks
the
at
formula was too overt for me.
I love it, frankly.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I'll buy into that anytime. So, so your discussion at Cost was probably one of the most clear and poignant 20-minute plus discussions on data, social media, and how we interact. I would imagine that dealing with the large companies that you do, part of your job would be education about social media. What percentage would you say that?
Yeah, it seems like a large percentage of the conversation is based on either education or just generally sort of hand-holding and getting people comfortable with the space. It's to sort of accomplish what we want to accomplish with the ideas and the plans and crazy things that we're hatching. We have to sort of first get everyone comfortable. So a lot of it is playing translator, to a strange land to a lot of folks and kind of giving them a feeling for what the value of these different platforms and environments and communities is, and kind of getting them to sort of feel that firsthand, and then use that experience and exposure and excitement to sort of channel into the things that we want to accomplish on the brand level.
Mm-hmm. I wrote down some notes while I was listening to your chat. Very dark. My handwriting is horrible. So this may come out a little garbled. I'm not going to lie.
That's okay.
Some of the statements you made were design presupposes intent, objects and intended use, Twitter, etc. Suggested use is a standard design principle. You showed a web trend map that kind of maps out where things are happening on the internet. I think was it the one that was the subway map? Or was it?
Yeah. I think we did pull up the regular web trends map. Absolutely.
So maybe riff on sort of where that talk came from, and was that formulated just for the chat, or for the? sorry, the conference, or is that something that talk that you give to new clients like that?
No, that was written specifically for the conference, just because being brought into something that was more focused on design, I wanted to kind of bring hopefully a unique perspective to it, and the way I sort of started thinking about that is just looking in our space and how we're sort of forced to advise designers and advise people creating these platforms, and it seemed like it was sort of relevant to talk about the fact that most of the things that have been wildly successful online have been through some combination of intent and accident from a design and sort of a concept perspective. And so, certainly, Twitter, which is a big part of how this all works, is a great example of that, and we talked about that. And I think someone from Wired magazine must have been in the audience, because if you pick up this month's Wired, there's a whole article about the sort of group design and group control, the mind control that the group has over the evolution of Twitter. That's pretty interesting. Yeah. So I sort of felt validated by traditional media, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, the whole point there was just that a lot of design, when you think of product design, when you think of visual design, is about knowing exactly what you want someone to do. You want them to put the shoe on and be comfortable, pick up the scissors and cut something, look at this site and click the buy button. But when it comes to sort of a lot of these emerging environments, particularly sort of digital and building social sites, there's just no necessary knowledge ahead of time about what people might want to do there, what value they might get out of the functionality. So it's a lot more, sort of putting this amorphous thing out there and seeing what people do to it. And you look at something like Craigslist, and it's like, that was a bare bones functionality that people decided to do something with. And then you look at something like 4chan, which I'm sure most people are familiar with, but it's sort of it's a visual message board that's filled with some amazing and filthy things. And, that's very similar in nature, and sort of it's a threaded, structured conversation, but it's used for something wildly different, including creating pretty much every internet meme that is in existence. So it's interesting to see what different groups of people will do with the same functionality, essentially, and where that leads the designer.
And that seems to be the theme of a lot of startups and people who are putting new products out there into the webosphere. That you can put a new idea out there, and then it's up to the crowd to use it. And however they use it, part of the game right now is listening, and listening to the crowd, and listening to the trends, and being able to react to that instead of just being a stoic company that this is our product. Now there's this interaction that's happening where like TweetDeck. TweetDeck gets released, and people are talking about it, and they're obviously listening because there's updates to it constantly, new ways of interacting.
Yeah, it seems like the whole notion of observing behavior, which is, I think, supposed to be rooted in kind of basic design theory, has been a little bit lost, particularly in the digital space, where it's harder to observe the behavior of someone sitting at home. You're not there. Not the same as watching somebody with a Palm or an iPhone or something in a test room. But observing behavior, before you go to do something, to see what are the native behaviors people are expressing, what's some of the emergent behavior that they're doing that we could use, ask them to do with us, take advantage of, watching them during the design process as you sort of beta test things and explore them. And then I think most importantly, looking at behavior after you put something out there and making some really subtle and quick adjustments. And my favorite funny example of people not doing this is the people that design women's restrooms in major, places like theaters, airports. They put the same number of restrooms in for women that they do for guys, and if they just stuck around for, say, a Broadway show on any given Friday night in New York, they'd see a line all the way out to the friggin' parking lot. That's basic human behavior that design should be, observing and reacting to in the next thing that gets built. And, here we are 50 years later from the last thing that got built, and there's still 2 women's restrooms and 2 men's. So I think that there's a lot of room out there to just be observant and sort of take a great competitive advantage from that.
And that's one of the great talents. You have to be this really well-rounded observer. You're going to be able to put out content that's more relevant to your audience. I've got to do a couple of quick show notes real quick. I forgot to mention a couple things tonight, and most nights, every night, almost since we started doing video. We are broadcasting from Samana Mason. in West Dundee, Illinois. On Twitter, they are at Sonomation. Also in the chat, we've got DesignChat links. When we're talking about something or referencing something, more often than not, we'll put that link up there for you. You don't have to remember to go back later. The other couple things are, big week for us. On Monday, we found out that we were finally released into the iTunes Music Store as a regular podcast. And we were very excited about that. So that if you aren't here for the live chat, which should be, you can always go and download the podcast there. We are going to be adding some advertisers soon. Thank you. The first one's going to be GoDaddy. I'm still sort of working out the details of how to do the spoken ad. I'm not really sort of like a broadcast guy. I'm a designer from outside of Chicago, and I'm kind of feeling this thing out. Still kind of a new thing, so hang in there with our advertising things. I don't want them to be intrusive upon DesignChat at all. I want them to be loose. Okay, so let's keep on moving on. Undercurrent. So you're based out in New York. How old is your group?
We are just about 2.5 years old now.
2.5 years old. Great time to be sort of forming, a great time to be doing any type of work like that, because there's so many cool things happening right now that you guys can react to. How big is your group?
We are about 20 people now, I guess, in total. We're adding about a person a month, so it's hard to keep a running track. But yeah, we're growing only as fast as we can sort of find the right breed of digital Pokemon that we're collecting. So
right. So one of the things I like to talk about is brand and how your brand is reflected on the internet. Just a quick overpass of your site. It's a very simple site right now. You guys are sort of forming. You've got this fun game to play with, the snake game, the directional game, and then a brief overview of who you are, then images of the faces, the people that make up your company. So part of your brand are the faces of the work. Maybe talk a little bit about that and sort of where that's.
Yeah, it's a big topic of discussion at Undercurrent always, because we have this notion of the sort of company brand, and then we also have all these individual brands, and a lot of places have the struggle of, which one did they put on a pedestal. We've always sort of opted for, following, the people that know us know that we sort of follow the first 2 rules of Fight Club, so we don't talk a lot about ourselves, and the site is certainly evidence of that. We're not, touting our awesome clients or the work we're doing, or, out there trying to get awards or anything like that. We, generally just try to shut up and do great work, but occasionally, when we have to sort of express who we are, a lot of it's about, how we think, and it's much better coming from the people that are sort of doing the thinking and planning than it is from some corporate voice. So we made a choice a while back to just really pull back the Undercurrent brand and let the people do the talking, and those people are sort of limited in what they can talk about to what they're thinking and kind of where their own thought process is headed, rather than trying to talk about sort of where the company's headed. So it gives each person a chance to kind of find their own voice, and a lot of people are out, doing their own speaking, doing their own interviews like this, and kind of figuring out what their specialty is within the context of what we're doing. So, while the site right now certainly promotes them, any site we have in the future will promote the people. And generally speaking, if you want to find out more about us, it's much better to go through the individuals than it is through any sort of, parent property.
So when you're approaching a new client, how do you kind of show the capabilities?
Yeah, so we have, most of our client work for starters comes through referrals. So it's one CMO to another or one CEO to another, and we're sort of, handed off like 007. And what we'll do is just, which is weird, and we'll just go in and we have a pretty substantial keynote presentation that kind of gets them right into the approach and what we do and how we do it and kind of how we think about it, who else we do it for. So they get brought into the club at that point, and we'll really expose what they need to know to kind of make an educated decision about, how and if to work with us.
So it sounds like the types of projects you take on are, of an extreme variety. It's not like you're cranking out pamphlets or anything specific like that. It depends on the needs of the client.
Yeah,
are there
definitely.
Cases where the client sort of tells you what their needs are and say, well, this definitely is in our area, it's not a good fit and move on?
Oh yeah, I mean, we turn away work all the time, primarily because people want us to get executional. So they'll be like, hey, can you design me a website, or can you build me, a program, or buy me media or whatever? And while we do have, some clients that get a pretty sort of full service approach from us strategically, where we'll advise them on all those things individually and kind of play a role, a management role in seeing things done. We don't do anything executional. So a lot of that work gets passed on to our agency partners, people that we respect in the industry, as kind of, a straight recommendation. And then other times they may not be ready to sort of ask the right questions. So they'll say, hey, I really need, someone to run my Twitter, or I need a viral video, or I need a new website. And we have to go back and say, well, wait a second, why do you need that? And it often turns out that, the CEO read a magazine article that got them excited about Twitter. So now Twitter's the mandate, rather than having a real logical reason for playing there and kind of a strategic underpinning of what they're going to try to do.
I wrote this question earlier last night, sort of trying to pick it apart. I'm always thinking about where social media and design are, because now we have all these ways of communicating, designing those experiences. And for me, I was trying to define it from last night, where those two roads cross. I always come back to branding, because both play such a large role in branding. You can design experiences, you can design physical material for a brand, and then in your social media, it's a voice of your company, and how that comes across in everyday life. And then when you're reacting to, bad news comes out about your company, and you've got to react. The way you react also part of your brand. Would you say that's fair to say that branding is kind of where social media and design meet?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely. To me, the word branding just sort of represents the consistency of an experience in a way, and so that experience lives visually, it lives in design, it lives in social, it lives in anything you touch, and so in that way, when you're talking about the overall experience, there are places where social and design are definitely going to interact, and I think that those are the places where the brand has a chance to do something interesting. The cool thing about, I think, design and social as two concepts in the space of branding is that they're two places where people have very emotional experience. So if you look at something that's beautifully designed, or that's elegant, or that seems to work for you in a really powerful, ergonomic way, that can have a real emotional underpinning to it. And the same thing can be said for a social experience, where you sort of see a brand humanize itself, talk to you one person to one person. It's not uncommon to hear about someone getting their, flight changed, or their seat changed, or their problem fixed on Twitter, and they're like pumping their fist in the air. So I think those are probably two of the more emotional touch points that a consumer can have, and in that way I think they play really well together.
The name Undercurrent, what's the sort of strategy?
Well, if I told you that, I'd have to kill you. The funny thing about
how many times I get told
the name
that
is
on
that
this
it just
show?
sort of...
Like every week I get told that same thing. I'm going to die.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you should just, wear some kind of protective clothing.
Some web Kevlar.
Exactly.
Right.
Woven Kevlar, maybe like a little woven Kevlar mamu. That's how you protect yourself from, Twitter assault.
Yeah.
Weblar. Somebody's going to have that microsite up.
Yeah, instantly.
That microsite up will be up by the end of the night. The main thing is just... The name was sort of just came to us and happened to be, at the time I don't think we even knew what it meant. We liked the sound of it, and it sort of seemed to represent the way we wanted to approach building a consultancy. And then over time it started to mean more and more, as we started to see what was going on with movements online and with the energy around digital, and kind of the way that we wanted to carry ourselves and be involved, kind of behind the scenes. It all added up to make sense, but I don't think it made sense when we chose it. It was just something that kind of spoke to us. And then we still had to go out and buy the .com, so.
But, it's so appropriate because everything right now is about staying current. So much information flying at us from direction.
Yeah, I guess.
On top of it, and very appropriate.
It's working so far, so that's good. At least it's not someone's last name.
Right. So we're going to touch on a couple current design topics right now and social media topics. There was an article that came out yesterday on Mashable. Most Fortune 100 companies don't get Twitter, and there were some charts involved in this article with some really amazing numbers. One of which was the link document. We'll put the link to the article in chat. So some of the numbers in there are 76% of Fortune 100 companies have 0 to 500 tweets. So we're looking at Fortune 100 companies that have registered their names on Twitter and aren't currently active. So 76% of them have 0 to 500 tweets. That's amazing to me that there's such a lack of activity.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, there's a lot of trepidation in anything with that kind of scale. And while you have certainly some consumer brands in the Fortune 500 that feel a need to sort of be relevant at the expense of, being right, there's a lot more, B2B and more traditional organizations in that mix that would rather not make a mistake, and so have taken a real sort of protective strategy there and haven't really thought carefully about what kind of value it could provide for them internally or externally. But I think that the challenge there is that they don't realize that by registering, by sort of acknowledging the space, but not showing up to the party, that they might be alienating the people that are following them, that are kind of waiting for them to provide some kind of feedback. And there's nothing more frustrating than sort of tweeting somebody that you think is registered for help, for a response, for an idea, and not getting anything because they're not sort of manning the ship. So. But I think we've seen that. I mean, that may be the current statistic, but all of our interactions suggest that that is changing rapidly. And I don't think we'll see that in a year's time.
But those will be some fun numbers to watch. Another one of them is 50% of the Fortune 100 companies have less than 500 followers. So we're also seeing an inactivity of the followers, the people looking out the company, which brought up a question in my mind. Could it be that some of these large companies, really large, expensive brands, maybe B2B type of companies, aren't right to Twitter, that they inherently don't really have a personal voice they could even put out? So it would have to be something they'd have to invent from scratch. Possible they shouldn't even do it at all?
Well, I think there's a few different kinds of value for Twitter, and I think that a brand has to choose which one, or I suppose multiple ones, it's trying to serve. The first one is customer service, which I'm a big proponent of. I think that the Twitter handle could be the 1-800 number of our generation in a way, and it'll be a lot easier to sort of get immediate response and help in a digital environment rather than on a phone. I know I certainly don't want to call any company ever again and try to talk to a person. I'd rather, it's so much easier to reach out to JetBlue or Starbucks or whoever. Of voice menus. Yeah. Button. Yeah, or Jonas Brothers hold music, or God knows what. So I think that so that's the first value, and I think really almost anybody who's going to be doing business in the next 50 years needs to think about their role in that sense, because even if you're B2B, even if you're Honeywell, you're going to have a customer who's 28 years old, who has a question, who's trying to put together a deal, who wants to reach out to you through that channel. So I think that that's a reasonable thing to consider. And the next one is the sort of promotional value, the idea of promoting some agenda that you have going on, whether it's a campaign or something you're trying to sort of generate traction for. And I think that's more of an option. It's like, do you want to use this channel as a promotional tool, or do you want to do something different? So I think that it's it kind of depends what value you're trying to get out of it. And then the last one is that you can look to it for insights, for building a community that you can kind of generate some kind of data from, and that that's a different thing altogether. And again, I think that's an optional, but it certainly colors the conversation.
I also want to make sure that I don't think Twitter is the end-all be-all sort of things that every company needs to use to manage their brand, but it is this sort of new way of talking to people, reaching out for whatever purpose might be. That some companies it might never take, but I'm hoping see that these new forms of communication really take off, because amazing things start to happen when, you start talking to each other, And one of the things about Twitter that people don't realize, all the naysayers who say it's about, my dog's doing this or I'm sitting on the couch, don't realize the other half of what's about it, that listen, you can hear really interesting things if you know where to know how to. And I think that's also where a lot of these brands are missing out.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I think brands just need to learn to recognize the difference between a utility as a concept and the new, something that's newfangled and unproven. And I think that, the idea behind some of these emerging sites is that they're sort of feeling around a new utility. So like Twitter or Facebook status is all the idea of the utility of a short form of communication, the sort of short 1 to 2 sentence communication as a utility. That's a channel through which we communicate in that way. And whether it's Twitter or Facebook or somebody else, that's sort of been established now as a platform. The idea of real-time, very short updates of what's going on in the world is going to be around. And then, the next thing coming down the pipe is looking at the idea of location. And where am I and what does that mean in terms of what you can show me and offer me and how can that become valuable data? And it's like, it doesn't matter if Foursquare is the next big thing. Location is the next big thing. So how are you going to play in that space? And which partners will you choose? And what does your brand have to gain from thinking about location or thinking about short-form communication or thinking about social networks back, 2-3 years ago?
I just read an article yesterday that was talking about things that are going on at Web 2.0 Expo, which you participated in yesterday or 2 days ago, I don't correctly. That just like what you were talking about, the geolocation part of what's going on. What sort of services, like you just mentioned, are out there right now that are doing that?
That are doing something with location?
Yeah.
Boy, that is bleeding edge at the moment. Like the brands that we work with that are sort of stirring up those conversations are literally structuring some of those location-based deals for the first time. I have seen in Google recently when I'm out and about some sponsored pins where you see like, a particular brand's logo or some of their information kind of more, a little bit more beef dropped onto the graph there, which is cool. Mm-hmm. And one of our clients is a rum called Don Q that is a rum out of Puerto Rico, and we've been working with them on basically creating a bar crawl type, sampling experience where when you check into a bar that serves Don Q, it's going to say, hey, have a Don Q here, and then go to this bar, and the next one's on us for free, and sort of start to get people joining around the city to try different drinks through this brand's lens. So that that's an example that will be live in the near term. That'll be literal. But other than that, a lot of the stuff I can't really talk about. But I will say that most of the brands we work with, and certainly the ones that are consumer packaged goods brands, will be doing some pretty cool stuff in the first quarter that is, at major retailers with major brands, allowing you to, either find out about new products, get discounts, connect with things, build up points, spend those points, sort of bring the digital world right into the store, hopefully in a way that people actually like and kind of enables a better experience, not just, we don't want to turn it into a thing where people are getting advertised to just because they've sort of opted in. It's really not about interruption. It's about what are you already doing and what do you want to get, a little bit of a benefit out of by sharing that information. So we'll see how it evolves.
That seems to be one of the big fears that's happening right now, that people are worried that all these new services, they're going to find all new ways of throwing advertising at us. We're just going to be more junk that we just like commercials we don't want to see anymore. And I think that is going to be one of the most interesting things is who's going to do that in the most successful way to make it least intrusive and the most enjoyable. And there was another piece of news. Razorfish released a sort of study or white paper document, if you will, called Feed last week or the week before, and they're talking about how the 30-second slot is dead because brands shouldn't be just throwing information at you anymore. It should be a conversation, interaction, and that way it's less intrusive in life because you want to talk because they're interested. So I think that's going to be one of the most fun things to watch in the next handful of years. Is what are the best ways to get that message to your consumer and people buy your product without being.
The twist is that it's really hard to tell the difference between an interruption and a welcome sort of serendipitous event because it's all in the eye of the beholder. If I'm watching television and a Mac versus PC ad comes on and I'm a PC user and I hate Mac, then that's an interruption. But if I'm a huge Mac fan and I love those ads and it's entertaining to me, then it's a welcome serendipitous event. So the weird thing is the context of knowing which person I am. But what's really scary is if we get so good at context and at knowing the behavioral patterns of people that we're only giving them what they want, then we lose the serendipity of sort of having a random experience of running into something you weren't expecting. I think we'll see a lot of dynamic in the next few years between those two things, between sort of surprise and delight and being totally programmed. But I think what will ultimately win out is hopefully the ability of systems to know us a little bit better and enough better enough that they can start to sort of program more frequent serendipity and more frequent things that sort of tickle us and that we think are interesting. The same way our friends do right now when your friends send you things they think you'll like. They're sort of using their own AI to say, hey, I think Ryan would really dig this, but not that, and send it to you. But it's still surprising. It's still interesting. It still sort of feels like a relevant thing. So hopefully the internet can become a better friend, quote unquote, in the way it reaches us with some of these brand messages.
Speaking of Mac, there was another news story that came out that Apple has filed for a patent on an operating system that's based on advertising. People are guessing that they'd sell these machines for free then. They'd essentially give away these machines. And in the patent it said there was an operation where after you were served up an ad, you had to prove that you had consumed that ad by clicking on something. And I think it's leaving a lot of people sort of scratching their heads as, why would anyone want to participate at all if that's that? Have you heard about this patent at all?
I haven't heard about the patent, although I think that's interesting. We've seen other services try to do this in other categories. We've seen mobile phones, minutes and bandwidth given away in response for watching ads. I think, those things only stand up when they're, really, really customized to the person using them and highly relevant. But I think that the weird part is that the best ads are never going to be just because somebody knows you, but really more about the context of the moment when you're looking for that thing. And so I think it's hard to create a system that pays for itself by interrupting you constantly with things that it knows you're interested in without knowing the moment that you're interested in it. So, the one time every 4 years that you're actually going to buy a car is a great time to get a car ad. Otherwise, you're sort of doing that slow chipping away and trying to create some kind of an odd brand affinity. And I think Google, certainly with AdWords, sort of created the ownership of a moment, that moment when you're looking for something online, and they created $50 billion in value by saying, hey, that's a moment someone's actually looking for something. That's a great place to show them some ideas. I think the other, sort of places where you have those moments are few and far between. Certainly on location, if I show up to, Target, I'm going to be buying something at Target probably. So that's a great time to kind of, quote unquote, interrupt me with some interesting and relevant offers at Target. But other than that and sort of the search bar, it's hard to find those occasions where people are really actually looking to do something and transact some business. So everything else is about brand building. And you have to ask yourself, which forms of advertising are really, really good at brand building and storytelling. And it might not be the ones that are, sort of best served up on the side while you're having a regular, computing experience.
Another piece of news that came out this week is Adobe released a new Flash player and Air 2.0 with multi-touch support, which sort of starts leaning towards we're now going to have multi-touch support experiences, more of them on the computer and our mobile devices. And I think this is really interesting because then you start thinking about the design execution of, what sort of fun interactions can you do where, you got this sort of minority report interface and all of a sudden everything on the screen is interactive and touch and move and playing around. Have you seen any sort of experiences like that or been a part of any of them recently?
We've certainly seen, some touch-based beta stuff, but I think, the question with touch and with all, and generally with some of the other sort of new stuff like AR is just, what natural behavior does that fit into? And I think it's, there's a lot of basic sort of human factors design that comes into play when you start to talk about that stuff. And certainly the iPhone, thought about some or, maybe most of it. But then when you start playing with a screen on a laptop or, a setting outside of work or even a touch table, things like that, it becomes a question of like how natural is it to use this thing and what, why do I need to touch it versus touching a touchpad or another piece of something. It's funny that you mentioned Minority Report because as soon as you started talking about this stuff, I was immediately thinking about that movie. I think there's so much in that movie that is actually going to be really relevant. Certainly the targeted advertising where they're saying his name and stuff like that. But the cool thing about the way they approached touch in that is that it was, there were the two little finger gloves that he was wearing that always sort of moved with him as the experience moved around. And I often think about that in terms of, what sort of becomes a part of us and what stays a part of the machine. Mm-hmm. And, they're doing a lot of things right now with digital optic nerves, and they're doing a lot of things right now with touch. And I think it all starts to add up where you think about, which part of the tech is on your person and which part of the tech is still on the desk. So that'll be cool to see. But I don't expect that, that touch is going to transform the basics of digital engagement, in the next couple of years. I think it's a new way to engage. It's an easy way to engage, but I don't think it changes sort of the fundamentals.
So what we're going to do here is we're probably nearing 3/4 to chat. We're taking some questions from the audience a little bit. We're going to those up you, do a little bit of Q&A with the audience. In the meantime, I'm going to do a couple quick announcements. So next week is Thanksgiving. We're not going to do a live chat next week. We're actually do a live chat tomorrow, which we will also record and then release week of Thanksgiving. We've had another cancellation. We were scheduled to have Douglas Caton on, and he's still coming on. We had to reshuffle a little bit, but he has written a book called Slow Life in a Tuscan Town. Very interesting. I don't know if you see this. But we will get to that in the near future. We're looking at January time to have him up. But in the face of tragedy, having a cancellation, a couple of really cool, interesting things happened. Through some contacts we were talking to, we were able to get a hold of two people, Mirko Ilic and Milton Glazer. Mirko is gracious enough to join us tomorrow night on live chat on Mashable. And Milton has agreed to join us, I think, January 20th. If you're not familiar with either of these people, definitely do some research. They co-wrote, I'm doing a lot of book promos right now, Design of Dissent. If you haven't seen this book yet, definitely go check it out. It's one of the most interesting pieces I think I've ever seen. And definitely Milton Glazer, if you're not familiar with him. A little factoid about him, he designed the I Heart New York logo. So he's a legendary figure in design. If you're not familiar, do your research, find out who the man is. Amazing.
Buy a T-shirt.
And buy a T-shirt. Just a couple more minutes till those questions come up. Not seeing them yet. I gotta sort of interact. So.
How is that cup not empty yet?
Which cup?
They keep asking about my Chipotle cup.
Oh, you're chugging on a Chipotle cup? I've been bad.
I have a staff assistant that just keeps refilling the cup every time I put it down.
All right, so we've got some questions here. Josh Shear, who I think you're familiar with, asked, what do you think about all these services popping up that are automating Twitter response customer service?
Can you repeat the last part?
What do you think about all these services popping up that are automating Twitter responses customer service?
Yeah, I think the quality level of the recognition of what kind of questions you're asking and what kind of answer you need is the deciding factor there. Chances are it's probably going to be ineffective initially, but if you give people basic language for how to call for an automated response, let's say they're looking for something that becomes a very common thing like a phone number or a particular question that always has a common answer or a link that people need, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, especially if you can use some kind of a buzzword or a jargon for I need a human response right now and get it sent straight to them. Some kind of a pound human or whatever that goes with your message that directs it to the right people. I think a lot of that, if it gets used for customer service, yeah, don't ever pound a human. I think as it gets used more and more for customer service, that language will emerge. I mean, it's the network of emergent behavior, so that ship will right itself, and I think there'll be a small role for automation, but I think better to staff up than to try to automate the whole thing.
Right. Then we'll just run into a whole phone situation. You got to sit through 20 dialogues.
Yeah, but instead of having to listen to hold music, you can just surf porn.
Right. Multitask. Fantastic. Justin in the chat room asks, if it's about location, do you see mobile continuing to lead the forefront?
Generally speaking, yeah. I mean, I think there's some things that are location-based that aren't in your phone, but they might be someday. A lot of what's in your wallet. So when you check in at a grocery store, if the whole idea of the smart shopping cart ever happens, those kinds of things could take it away from the mobile. But as the mobile becomes more and more the center of sort of your identity on the go, and potentially financial information gets dropped in there, other interactive information, and especially if it could sync up with the world that you just walked into and sort of pull down information and be part of the network of wherever you are. Yeah, I think mobile is the centerpiece.
Totally agree on that. The next question comes from Shampton Alive. How can a brand become part of my life / participate instead of just sell me something?
How can a brand become part of your life instead of try to just interrupt and sell you something? It depends on the brand, frankly, and I think some brands have a lot more business doing that than others, depending on the category and depending on sort of the brand's personality. But the main idea that we talk about is just providing some entertainment service or utility for the person that's on the other end of the line, and if that's in the nature of your brand to provide a service, to provide a place where people can get something, that can sort of manifest a relationship. One of the things that we talk about in our consulting a lot is just, what's a good reason to come back every day? And when you look at most corporate websites, they're either static information or they're very one-way, but they're not functional at all. They don't really provide a value, and that's why, as sort of regular a reference as it is, something like, a Nike Plus makes a lot of sense. That's a platform that gives you a really good functional reason to use something that they make, go check into a site frequently, and get some value out of that. So we try to steer brands in as much of that direction as they can go. And if it doesn't make sense, then just leave it alone. Maybe it's not an appropriate challenge to put yourself through if there isn't an obvious way to kind of engage on that level.
Do you think that brands creating content is becoming more important?
I just had a really interesting panel discussion about this in LA with a few really smart people, and the basic gist of it was, does brand-funded content always have to be second class? And it seemed like the role of a brand in getting content made was so nebulous, because certainly they pay the ads that create, that make programming possible across most networks. But then you look at some of the places where content is going direct to the consumer, like a Showtime or an HBO, where there isn't really a funding outside of the audience, and the quality's higher, the experience is different, and it sort of raises the question of, can the role be someone that facilitates that direct connection rather than pays for a piece of that time? So I don't think there's a clear answer to that, but I do believe fundamentally that content and experiences that people pay for, that they put money down on the table for, and get something in return, that's where the highest value lies in content, and where it's sort of unadulterated by the brands that want to capitalize on that attention.
So we're nearing the end of the night here. A couple more announcements for everybody who's here. We are going to be starting an internship program with DesignChat, where we bring in a design student or a video student, whoever is creative, and to help out the show, and also to sort of start their networking process before they start looking for a job. And something that's going to be part of that is we're going to have a section on the show each week where an intern asks questions, so they can start getting some interaction, high level, and something we're looking forward to doing very much. But the search is what's important at this point. Start looking for that intern. So if anybody knows an anxious and energetic college student involved in the creative world, please send us an email. Send me an email at hoopajube@gmail.com or up on Twitter at hoopajube or at DesignChat. So a couple of quick thank yous, of course, to Samana Mason for letting us broadcast from their agency, Invest on Deloitte, very about SamanaMason.com. And of course, a big thanks always to Mashable for letting us have this chat here on their site. And of course, Aaron, you were awesome tonight. Thank you so much for being on. Awesome.
No problem. Anytime.
So where can people sort of follow things that you're doing in the future? Is Twitter the best place at Aaron Dignan?
Twitter is the most commonly used platform in the office, so certainly you can follow me and the other guys there pretty easily. And then otherwise, getting together in person is a great way to do it.
Well, if we're ever in New York, DesignChat will definitely make a visit to you.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, it's been fun. Have a good night. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you guys in the future.
Thanks a lot.
Night.